The year is 2001. In January alone, the launch of iTunes and Wikipedia, along with the swearing in of a new United States president, all occur. But these events are only the beginning of one of the most influential years in history. Because only 8 months later, 19 terrorists that were found to be a part of Al-Qaeda hijacked 4 commercial airliners in order to intentionally crash the planes into important United States buildings. On that fateful day, both the World Trade Center's Twin Towers and the Pentagon were hit, with the 4th attempting to hit the U.S. Capitol, but were unable to when the passengers on board revolted, and the terrorists were forced to crash the plane into an empty field. Over 2 decades have passed since this tragedy, and yet even to this day, it is still talked about. It is present in mainstream media. So what exactly is it that makes these attacks so relevant in public memory? This is the history of the September 11th terrorist attacks. Al-Qaeda, the terrorist group responsible for the terrorist attacks on September 11th, actually had motive dating as far back as 3 years before 9/11, when Osama bin Laden, the leader of Al-Qaeda, signed a fatwa that called for the killing of Americans, as America's positive relationship and support of Israel was something that bin Laden and many others, inside and outside of Al-Qaeda, hated. However, Al-Qaeda was one of the only groups of people to seek revenge against America through terrorism for not supporting the Muslim religion. It is this hatred of America, shown through the signing of the fatwa, that shows further insight into the specifics of why 9/11 was done. Osama bin Laden, the leader of Al-Qaeda, at first denied involvement in the terrorist attacks. Despite almost outright saying that Al-Qaeda was involved, it wasn't until 2004, 3 whole years later, right before the next presidential election in the US, that he publicly admitted that Al-Qaeda was responsible for the terrorist attacks. Now, something you may not know about bin Laden is that he was actually born into a rich family. His father, Mohammed bin Awad bin Laden, was a millionaire who made his fortune by being a cheap construction company, which allowed his company to construct palaces, making an immense amount of money for it. What's also interesting is that the bin Laden name was actually known to be the richest non-royal Saudi family. One major reason why the 9/11 attacks were so severe towards citizens, with close to 3,000 dead, was because he believed that American civilians were legitimate threats to Muslims achieving spiritual self-perfection. Of course, this is just the belief of those in the Al-Qaeda terrorist group, and although others also believe this, most Muslims don't in any way. After the events of September 11th occurred, and bin Laden kept denying he had any part in it until he eventually gave up pretending, the United States went on a manhunt for his head. However, it wasn't until May of 2011, almost a decade after the initial attacks and having lived through 2 presidencies, that he was finally found and killed for his crimes. At 8:46 a.m. Eastern Time on the morning of September 11, 2001, the North Tower of the World Trade Center was hit by a Boeing 767, colliding and damaging floors 93 through 99. Only 17 minutes later, the South Tower was hit, this time a bit lower than the North one, hitting floors 77 through 85. 34 minutes later, the West Wall of the Pentagon was hit, and although there were fewer casualties than the first 2 planes had caused, 126 were still killed in the strike. The last plane crashed 26 minutes later, at 10:03 a.m. Eastern Time, crashing in the middle of an empty field after passengers gained back control of the plane and the terrorists forced the plane into a nosedive as a last resort. The people on board were the only ones killed. The total number of people killed from these strikes total up to 2,996, just shy of 3,000. After all 4 strikes happened, the Twin Towers slowly started falling apart, burning from the inside, with many jumping out of the building to their death as a result. The South Tower, although hit after the North Tower, fell just 55 minutes after the impact, with the North Tower falling later, 1 hour and 41 minutes after impact, 29 minutes after the South Tower fell. The falling of the Twin Towers caused immense damage and killed many more people, some on the ground and some still in the towers. After the falling of the North Tower, debris hit the 7 World Trade Center, damaging it and setting it on fire, causing the building to collapse 7 hours later at 5:21 p.m. Eastern Time. After the events had transpired, the FBI sought to find out who or what had planned out the attack and how they could get revenge on them for what they did. In only just a few short hours, the FBI had already found out the names of some of the terrorists and were already working out Al-Qaeda connections. On September 17th, 6 days after the attack, the FBI interrogated a former bodyguard for bin Laden, who had been in prison since 2000, who confirmed numerous connections between the terrorists and Al-Qaeda. Only a few months later, and they had pretty much confirmed that Osama bin Laden was to blame. This kickstarted the war on terror, leading American and NATO troops to invade Afghanistan to kill Osama bin Laden, and to kill the Taliban for harboring him and not accepting their terms of giving them Osama bin Laden. This war would go on for close to 2 decades until in February of 2020, an agreement was signed for the removal of US and NATO troops from Afghanistan. Overall, it seems that despite the event having transpired close to 22 years ago, 9/11 still has a place in present culture and is still talked about to this day. This shows us how 9/11 is such a memorable event in the hearts of many because of how traumatic it was to everyone who saw it on the news, and saw it from their window, and saw it from their commute to work, and saw it so many other indirect ways. Which is what I think really shows us one reason why Christopher acted the way he did when he saw the North Tower fall from his perspective, because it was traumatizing for him.